Welcome to the Iolani School podcast. I'm John Tamanaha, Director of Interactive Media and a frequent morning visitor to the faculty lounge where coffee is usually accompanied by good conversation. This podcast project is an attempt to share that sort of experience with a larger audience. This is our 7th episode as we continue to visit with a wide variety of people associated to Iolani School to hear their personal stories. This time we sat down with former boys basketball head coach Dean Shimamoto, who recently stepped down after 10 seasons that netted 4 league and 3 state championships. But our conversation 4 days after his surprising announcement wasn't so much about wins and losses, certainly not X's and O's. It was mostly about the art of coaching, the thoughtful journey it takes you on, and the valuable lessons learned along the way. Thanks for downloading. Please enjoy. Well, you've had a few days to think about this, your big announcement. And so what was it like? How did it feel to not be the head coach of the boys basketball team this past weekend?
I don't think it felt any different. I think it'll feel different maybe come October of next year, while things are going on, knowing the things that I would have had to have done if I was the head coach. So I'll probably get the feeling maybe closer to that time when practices start coming or, games start being played, maybe even in the preseason around December time. So I probably won't know the actual feeling. Like right now it feels the same as it did. So I think some of me is on autopilot as far as thinking that I'm going to have to prepare for the summer league or start setting things up and things like that. But generally at this time, I'm kind of turn my mind off anyway and just take a break. So right now, it feels like any other time. So no real difference yet.
Aside from, I would guess, a lot of text messages and phone calls and.
Yeah, the analogy I was making to people, it was a really neat experience. I mean, some of it I expected, a lot I didn't, but it was really like going to your own funeral. Not in a bad way, but in a way where like people just say nice things about you and you get these really cool messages from people that you haven't seen in a while, or former players or former coaches or current coaches. And that part was a really cool experience. And really the only way I could equate it was it really kind of felt like a funeral where people were just saying nice things, but it was neat. I mean, it was a really, really touching and you really feel honored by the fact that people were paying attention that you didn't realize were, and then even from your colleagues and former players, you get comments by these guys and compliments that they probably wouldn't just say to you if it was just another year or another thing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense though, because your life has been synonymous with basketball and Iolani basketball in particular. And that announcement was saying, I'm stopping doing this, So it was a big deal. I know that you love coaching. Why?
I mean, coaching was one part of me. I mean, granted, it was a big part of who I was and probably a big part of why I'm here working at the school.
Yeah.
But, on the same note, things happen and, your priorities change and things become more important than other things. And that was easily my kids. I don't think it was even really a question. It was kind of a question of, it was a matter of when,
Yeah, head coaching started 10 years ago. Kids started 7 years ago. And then again, 5 years ago. And
the early parts of kids is taking care of them and keeping them alive, kind of thing. And then now it becomes more of this development stage for the kids where they're getting more involved in things. I mean, sports is obviously a big part of that, but just other things. I mean, they're more engaging and they're more aware of what's going on around them. And when their dad's there and when he's not. And as much as they enjoyed going to the games, I think they enjoyed me being home and around them more.
Yeah.
So that was really the decision. I mean, in a lot of cases, family is cited just as the, I guess, knee-jerk response to why did you stop doing it or whatever. But, so people were asking me in those scenarios, like, is your health okay? Is your marriage okay? Did you have issues with parents or kids? And the short answer is no. My health is, as far as I know it, is okay. And as far as I know it, my marriage is okay. So, it really was about that pull for my kids. And they weren't the ones saying, hey, I wish you didn't do this anymore, or can you stop, or anything like that, nor did my wife. So it was probably just me recognizing that they are getting older, and having spoken to really a lot of people that have gone through the process, I would say it was like 100% for the people that walked away from whatever they were doing to spend more time with their kids. It was 100% who said, best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
Not, it was okay or anything like that. It was like 100% best decision I ever made. And then even the ones that have now high school kids and are able to reflect back to this point where their kids were the same age as mine, some were saying that, I wish I spent more time with them, or they were too busy because of work, so mom had to take care of it and this and that. And they realize now, as I've realized as a coach, that once they hit a certain point in their teens, or maybe even a little before that, they don't necessarily even want to be around you,
Yeah.
At this age, at almost 5 and almost 7, my kids are excited to see me, excited to be around me, and I'm not naive enough to think that it's going to continue into their 20s. And I see it every day in school, so this window of time where my kids want to be with me and I want to be with them, I figure I can't miss out on that, because that's just going to disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. You're guarding against regret, and you're doing it probably a couple years before most, I would say, if not more than a couple. So that's a good move. Because that identifying that time frame, my daughter's 10, and I know that those years are coming when she's not going to be so excited, and it's going to be more about friends and all of those things. And I'm well aware of that. Working at the school, we see kids growing up all the time, and we know the parents, we see the parents. So that might have played your day job might have played a role in this realization, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of things worked out definitely in my favor to allow me as a coach to be able to step away really at this point. I started pretty young, so to be able to say I'm 10 years in, 10 years feels long, but at the same time feels short.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that, but we've also been fortunate enough to have success, at least coaching-wise, from a wins and losses perspective. So it's not as though I needed to hang on to say, oh, I want to get one, or I want to get a championship, or I want to get this or that. Been fortunate enough to have been successful early. So now there is that option. I know there's a lot of coaches that want to do that, that want to be able to get theirs, and that makes them feel accomplished, So I don't know how I'd feel had the situation been different. I'd like to think that I'd made the same decision, but I know it'd be a heck of a lot harder if we didn't have that success, just because I'm so competitive.
I think some of the surprise and some of the questions stems from the fact that people, just in general, the casual fan or casual observer doesn't really understand what goes into coaching. Yeah, they see you at the games. Yeah, they understand that there's practices. But there's a lot more than just that. So when they say I'm going to spend more time with the kids, it's not just I don't need to be at the gym at 4 o'clock for a 6:30 game and those sorts of things, and practice 5 times a week. Give us some insight into what the program head of a basketball team at this school is involved in?
On the year-round, I guess, perspective, right now we just finished the state tournament maybe a couple weeks ago, and we have a little bit of a break. But here at Iolani, we run the summer league. We run the ILH summer league, so the preparations would get started to run the summer league, which would mean finding the teams. And it's more or less clockwork at this point, but it's still securing those teams, making sure that they're going to be in the league, then setting the schedule, getting the gym time. That's just for the league, and then we'll have summer basketball. We add an extra team at the intermediate level during the summer, so instead of the 5 teams that we would have during the year, we would have 6 teams, which is kind of just a truncated, I guess, process from the regular season. So I don't know if that makes it easier, it makes it harder, but we still need to get announcements out to those kids. We still need to cut in certain cases. We still need to manage the practices and the practice times in between finishing school and graduation and all the normal end of year stuff. So that's just for the summer. It's setting up the summer league, setting up our summer programs with 6 teams and cutting and making sure the coaches are doing things, getting those guys into the summer leagues for their different levels, and then managing our team, trying to get us set for the summer and manage that in between the other summer commitments to volleyball and baseball and football, and get that set for summer. And then we have a little bit of a break, and then come September we would start off-season workouts with our team. So that would go 2 to 3 days a week, managing whatever that workout is going to be. And then coming into the early parts of the intermediate season, which would be around October, getting started with our season, which would be mid-November, potential travel in December, which means some type of fundraising. So we do a fundraising clinic, so organizing a 2-day clinic for the kids. And then Iolani Classic and helping with the Classic. And then going through the season. I mean, the season almost seems like a small part at that point when you look at the whole year, but I mean, that's the part that you're working for and working towards. So, and really from that November time all the way through till hopefully the end of February, I mean, you're booked up. Basically, you're going 6 days a week on a regular practice schedule and game schedule, including preseason travel and everything like that. So for that November, December, January, February, for 4 months, I mean, feels like a full-time job, at least from that standpoint. But I would say the big thing that I was telling people is it's almost like, I guess, people that commute in traffic. If you lived in Mililani and you said you're going to live in Mililani, you expect to have morning traffic and you expect to have afternoon traffic when you come home. You know that's going to happen. But the thing that you don't expect, and it's almost the same in coaching, is that on Saturday at 10:30 and you're trying to drive to town and you hit traffic by Fort Shafter coming in and you're going, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And I think it's the same when we have a Saturday game at 6 o'clock and in the evening. I mean, my day feels like it's just shot. I mean, yeah, we got to maybe physically be there from maybe 3:30 to have a meet and a shoot around and catch the bus to wherever game and all that kind of stuff. But wherever I am physically, I mean, I may be present, but mentally is just, I'm thinking about the game. I'm thinking about what's coming. I'm thinking about, everything from jerseys to environment to, I don't know, to a little bit of everything. So, I mean, that way, and I think that happens a lot. I mean, mentally, I'm just shot, at least as a head coach.
Sounds to me like the word responsibility is the thing that really kind of weighs on your shoulders and your brain. It's just, you're responsible for so much, and you have a day job, you have a family and all that stuff, but the basketball sounds like a huge responsibility.
Yeah, those points about having those things on my mind, I mean, part of it is me not being able to turn it off, I think. Yeah. But on the same note, if you see our practices, I'm driving these guys hard, you know. The expectations are really high for them, and we put it on them. So I'm not going to be the guy that says to do this and then I'm the weak link. I'm not the one preparing like I should for them to be successful, especially with me expecting so much of them. So I don't know that it needs to be that way for everybody, but that's how it is with me. And the realistic side of being able to like turn that off or tone it down or something, I'd somehow think I'm doing a disservice.
Yeah.
So maybe other people, like I said, could manage it in a different way that makes the balance a little bit better between family and sport. You know, I mean, you take Doc Mugiishi, right? I mean, for example, I mean, he was a surgeon. You can't put things aside.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when you're doing surgery, you got to do surgery. You can't be thinking about the game, you know. So, like I said, other people could do it. That's just not me. So,
I know how hard you work in coaching, and it shows up in the results. I wasn't around when you were a player, right? How hard did you have to work to be as good as you were as a player?
Oh, I think that was my thing. I mean, I wasn't, and I'm still not athletic. You know, I mean,
but you're still a good basketball player.
I mean, that's the big joke, right? I mean, at this point, at 40 years old, 42 years old, 40 plus, I tell people that I've been playing, and my style of play has been like a 40-year-old for the last 30 years. So I'm far better at playing like a 40-year-old than anybody else because that's how I've always played. I've always played unathletic and try to be smart and be crafty, and that's been my game this whole time. So that's why I'm probably better at it now than anyone else my age. But I mean, no, I mean, growing up, that was the thing, man. I mean, that was from my dad and probably from his dad to him. I mean, it was, if you're going to go do something, you go be good at it, and you're going to have to put in time and tons of hard work. And my dad especially invested a lot of that time in me. And I don't know. I mean, that's really how it was done. So, I mean, that's the only way I know how to do anything is just kind of put my head down and kind of grind it out.
At what point did you adopt basketball? Because your dad was a baseball coach at first, and you know, don't take this the wrong way, but you look like a baseball player. You know what I mean? You made yourself into a basketball player because you liked basketball. How did that start?
I played all the sports when I was little. I mean, I played soccer, I played baseball. I mean, maybe not football, but there was a stint in volleyball, I think, at some point. But just baseball was just too slow for me, you know.
You like the action.
And yeah, no, I liked the action of basketball. I don't know why specifically. I don't know. Maybe I liked watching it. Maybe I liked the shoes. I don't know what it was. You know what I mean? In growing up at that time, 7 to 10 years old, that was the early parts of the Laker runs and then into the bad boy Pistons and Jordan and all this kind of stuff. But on the early parts, I don't know if that impacted me or not, but it definitely kept it going once I knew I liked it. And again, credit to my dad to kind of shift gears. I don't know that he was necessarily a coach, but he was definitely a baseball player. I mean, I don't know that basketball even entered his mind at that time. But again, that credit to say that this is not something I know, but my son seems to like it, so I'm going to find the best places to put him. I ended up with Coach Agena at Kalakaua in the early days because he said he wanted to find the best place. If you want to do this, you're going to be the best. You know what I mean? Or go and train with the best. So he went and did that, and then he went and figured out basketball. And he's that same type where if he wants to know and he wants to get good at it, he's going to study it like no other, you know? So he became a basketball coach, but pretty much 100% because I showed an interest in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that work ethic as a player, do your players, were they aware of that, of your history, or they just see you as a coach
Probably
with a
not.
work ethic like that?
Probably not. I mean, I don't think you are ever really aware of what people go through. You know what I mean? You don't
tell
assume
them
they're cruising.
You don't tell them stories.
Nah, not really. I mean, I don't think they assume that I'm cruising or being lazy
Yeah.
or anything about that, but I don't think they realize maybe some of the time that you put in, you know, or the path that you took to get there. I mean, they know that I probably played and, you know, things like that, but I don't think I don't think they give it much thought,
You don't tell
to
them
be
war
honest.
stories, because you said earlier that you push them hard. And,
Yeah,
and
I
you
mean,
would
they
push
know that.
yourself
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
as well. Or
I mean, I would guess, I would think they assume that I'm working hard too, you know, at some point. So I don't know, but it's fortunate that we have kids that work like that and kind of take the instruction. So it's been good.
what's the most enjoyable part about coaching for you?
The most enjoyable, I think, it's just seeing the kids grow. You know, I mean, so similar to parenting, I think.
Yeah, a lot of them you get for 4 years.
I mean,
some of the freshmen that come in and
yeah, seeing them grow up and seeing them be able to take instruction. Sometimes they start off really slow and it takes a little bit more time because sometimes they need to mature. But seeing them go from point A to point B or C or D, that's probably the coolest thing about it. And you've heard other coaches say it, you know, the really great ones, that a lot of the excitement comes from who they become later and what they end up doing, and seeing that you might have had a little piece of the person that they've become. You know, I mean, that's kind of the cool part, that you get to see that happen, not just in front of you as a player or a current player, but just watching them mature and, you know, take jobs or do other things or get married or whatever. I'm not to the point where too many of the guys that I've had have had kids, but at least, well, no, I take that back. I mean, when I was an assistant, you know, there's guys that definitely now have kids and whatnot, but that's definitely really cool. Yeah.
The players on your first championship team are about 27 years old at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, the early ones are just kind of getting married now, but no kids yet. But I mean, it's neat to still have that type of relationship with them, where now it's kind of a adult relationship.
Yeah, they're definitely in the workforce, and
yeah,
guys
I
like
mean,
Kaino Ashir on our Iolani Classic Basketball Committee, and
well, I mean, Jared Arkawa's on my staff, right? I mean,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So no, it's really neat just to see them grow up and move on and become adults themselves. So I mean, that's definitely the coolest part.
What's the most important part? Like, what do you hope to accomplish when you're coaching?
I think the same things that maybe my father wanted to do as a parent, or I want to do as a parent. I mean, you want to teach them about values, and you want to teach them, I guess, some strategies to be successful, you know, moving forward. I mean, like I said, the most important thing is kind of having them be successful. You want them to be able to move on and be successful, you know, not just in sport.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
Is it, maybe that's not the most important part, but are you kind of referring to downloading to them mental toughness, grit, things they're going to use in their life? I mean, we all continue to like to play basketball, but what are we taking from the lower gym in those sessions?
Yeah, a little bit of all of that. Yeah. You know, I mean, some of it is just goal setting and planning and having an idea of how you're going to get from one spot to the next, or how to be successful. Yeah. I mean, you know,
strategies.
To understand that if you do it a certain way, that you have a chance or to be more successful than if you don't. and then hopefully some bits of values. And really the payback on these things is pretty long term. I mean, I remember being in those spots when I was a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in high school, and coaches would say things to you and they would end with, in life, something,
Yeah.
you know, and it flew right over my head, and I think it still does. But there's a point in time where you realize the value of those statements, and you realize how your thinking has been shaped by those people. So you just hope to have that kind of impact, I think, moving forward with the current kids and even the past kids.
What is some of your favorite memories of the last 10 years, or maybe even back to when you were an assistant and as a coach?
The championships are definitely memorable. I mean, but more because you know where you started. And we kind of used to say this a lot, but wins and losses are results. You know, the process on how you get there is what's important, you know. So if you focus on the process and focus all the things you're supposed to do in the specific moments, then the result will be better. So those championship seasons, you know where you started. And a lot of times those championship seasons were not built in that one season. I mean, it was growth over years in specific guys. So to see that happen with those guys, and then in that year with the team, and you see the end result be a championship, you know it's something, you know that at some point, whether at that time or later, the kids are going to realize, like, oh man, you know, I made this change. I didn't know if it was going to work, or I decided to put this kind of work in. I decided to focus myself and just really bust my butt. And then for them to equate that to success, you kind of know that, you know, the wheels are turning, that like, oh man, this equals that. And again, it doesn't happen in every case, but the fact that they can make that connection and say, you know what, I think I can reapply that. You know, so that's why those championships are kind of neat, because it puts that to the end, and then it allows them to make that link. So a lot of those are really neat to be able to be a part of it. Less so for me, but more so for them to, like I said, be able to make that connection. But I remember what it was like to have been a championship player and the sacrifices you made to be able to get there. So to be able to help them get to have that experience again, I think that's really neat for them to do that. But there's just tons. I mean, tons and tons of memorable, I think, moments that will just make me stop and laugh, or, you know, or whatever. I mean, it draws some bit of emotion out just to even think about it. In a lot of cases, I'll talk to some guy later and they'll say, remember when you did this? And I don't, you know, but obviously 10 years later, they have it in their head. And then it's just, I'll kind of think about it. It's like, oh, yeah, I remember that. So, like, I don't know. I'm kind of looking forward to more of those moments, to be able to kind of reflect back a little bit more on those singular times, or, you know.
Is the 2014 year the best example of that kind of growth? Are they all similar?
That one, yeah, I don't, you know, maybe I would say more so 2016 than 2014. The 2014 guys, I really felt like some of the pieces started to come together with a little bit of everything. I mean, that was when Hugh Hoagland was a freshman.
Yeah.
You know, so he wasn't the player that he was when he graduated in 2017, but he was kind of finding his way, and he was able to kind of have an impact but not have to be the star just yet, you know. And you saw guys, mainly the Zach Bushers and Ikaika Phillips, you could see the switch flip at some point where the focus just jumped up to 10 and they said, you know what, we're going to make this happen. But they're both not super vocal, loud guys. So you could see it flip, and then you saw guys kind of just take to it. And then it kind of went along, you know, that way. It was
an example.
Yeah, no, it was a kind of a trip. And then even at that point, I think even in my own coaching, I guess, progression, that year was a switch for me. I would say the year prior to that, you know, well, we won in 2010. We went to the finals in 2011. And then 2012 and 2013, we didn't make the state tournament. And what I realized after around the 2012 or 2013 years was that I got caught up kind of in the tinkering of all we need to do is do this with this team because we have this type of guys, and then we can be successful, because we had won in 2010 and then been very successful in 2011. So, well, 2012 we got Duke Pauly and Gabo Vega. We got some size. We got a couple shooters. So we're going to put in this offense, and this is going to work. And, you know, we'll just teach them this for this year, and then it'll be great. You know, we weren't that successful. And then 2013, I guess a little similar. So it kind of right around that time, I came to the realization that, you know, we weren't doing enough teaching. It was a little too much tinkering. And there was points in time during that time where I also went through some leadership type things that really helped me and helped my perspective on things. And that was all hitting, I think, at the same time with Zach and Ikaika maturing, and then Hugh comes in, and, you know, we have all these kind of pieces starting to fall into place. And that's what happened in 2014, I feel like.
You kind of touched upon it, but how did you talked about your coaching style, maybe is what you just, or how you were coaching, but how did you change as a coach in the 10 years?
That was probably the biggest shift. That 2013 to 2014 shift was a greater focus on just doing the simple things and doing the things that I know. And this is kind of the line that we came up with at that time, which was, don't teach them plays, teach them how to play. You know, and that kind of fits with that tinkering to teaching, you know, and that became a pretty big focus. And that shift was probably combined with a little bit more of relationship building and, you know, the focus on the things that these really great long-term coaches talk about that you think you're doing early, but you're really not doing enough of. You know, it's about relationships. Okay, yeah, well, I'm nice to these guys. You know, I buy them lunch, or, you know, and things like that. So I don't think I'm even all the way there yet. I mean, the funny thing is I'll look back a year ago, or even maybe back to this season, and kind of just say, oh, why did I do that? Or maybe I could have done that differently, approached it differently. And, you know, I mean, that's the thing that always, I think, keeps coaches hungry from year to year, is that there's always a little bit more progress that could be made. So I think that's probably the biggest shift from that 2013 to 2014 year. It became simplification of what we were doing, and then understanding that building the relationship with the kids and getting them to compete or finding ways to motivate them based on you knowing them. I think those things became more important than the schemes.
Yeah. So I was asking about, you know, kind of like the non-technical things, the relationships, did you sense that, like, at a certain point, oh wow, I'm changing, like in your way, how you were relating to the kids, or?
Yeah, I think so. I still wouldn't consider myself to be like a player's coach. Like
You became
you
a
see
dad,
people
though,
say,
in the middle of
yeah.
this,
I mean, I think I still have a lot of like my dad in me in the way that he raised me and I guess coached me while I was growing up. And a lot of that was you earn your compliments.
yeah.
There's no gratuitous praise. Or there wasn't any of that growing up. What I mean? It was whatever you want to call it, tough love, loving tough, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think that's how I grew up. And I feel like generationally, and this makes me feel really old when I say that, generationally, I think it's a little bit different. I mean, I call these, everyone says millennials or whatever, but I call it the like generation. A lot of what they do and a lot of their decisions are motivated by likes.
Yeah, there's a dopamine that happens.
Yeah, right. I mean, whatever scientifically, I think there's a lot of need for likes, and they're used to likes, and so the almost what I would consider gratuitous praise is almost necessary in certain cases. And then, because I'm as far from the Pete Carroll rah-rah guy on the sideline, or even some of the Steve Kerr type things that he's doing on the sideline. I'm pretty far from that.
Yeah.
And yet I think some of that is necessary. And
yeah, old school.
Yeah, and and I tried to incorporate it a little bit, but it's super hard, and I don't know that I was super successful. So I mean, had I continued coaching, that probably would have been a big amount of focus for me. Would have been to see if I can adapt to this, find a balance of instructing and being tough, but still being able to give them that little extra praise that almost feels uncomfortable. I mean, it does feel uncomfortable for me to give.
Yeah, that's what you're used to. That's how you grew up.
Yeah,
working with your dad.
Yeah.
When you were playing for Doc Mugiishi, I was on the mainland, and my former 8th grade science teacher was winning all these championships, the first of which you were the starting point guard. So I was getting the bulletin or seeing this, and wow, Doc Mugiishi. It's kind of hard for me to conceptualize. We used to play with him down at the lower school courts, and when he was a teacher. But what was he like as a coach?
I've said it before that he is the smartest guy that I've been around, personally. I mean, that's no slight to anybody else, but, he was able to do things and pick things up so quickly and with such great depth, but seemingly make it so easy, seem so easy, So it was hard to figure out how many things were calculated and how many things were by accident or, fortunate. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, you look back on the championships and you just think every move was on purpose. But I would say the biggest things that I took from him were, one, to really think out of the box. I mean, him becoming the basketball coach in itself is almost an out-of-the-box thought, as you said. Yeah, I mean, he was not looked at as the guy that's going to be the basketball coach. If you saw him, I'm sure, in his high school and then even as a teacher. I mean, it might have made sense for me to have done it because I played and that was a big part of me, but I don't think you matched that up with him.
No. But you could see him playing a role as an assistant.
Right.
Being a...
But I think that plays into why he was successful.
Yeah.
He didn't approach it as the player guy. He approached it as like, maybe not the mad scientist, but the brilliant guy that he was. It's like, what's going to make us successful?
Logic and reasoning.
And that's the thing is, he is able to kind of simplify these things. You say, you look at this, it could have been anything, and I think he's a good writer. I think he's a good speaker because he understands that, hey, in every story, there needs to be an opening, a conflict, all the, whatever, right? And, okay, put those together, okay, it's going to work. And I think he can reapply that to sport and reapply that to basketball. But that's what I learned a lot from him, was be able to think out of box. The other thing was really focusing on the kids. There's points in times where you as a coach look at players for what they can do on the court and where they fit into your scheme or your team, and that's kind of how you peg them. And there were several moments throughout the time when I was assisting where Doc would really make it a point to look more at the person and how his part on the team or his ability to be with the team would impact him as a person, and how that would help this person, move along. So to really be able to give someone a chance for other reasons outside of basketball, I think was something that I took away, having seen it, firsthand, and then even seen the result later on of how it impacted that person or that player at the time and what kind of adult they became. So kind of back to that original thought about what's important, is developing these people.
When you were a player for him, were you interested in coaching? Is that a...
I think so. I had this theory that unathletic point guards make the best coaches.
Yeah.
Why
is that?
You're forced to think the game first. You're not getting by on athleticism. Everything that happens in the game, it's something you have to be a step ahead of, or your edge is going to come from analysis or a better understanding or basketball IQ type of thing. So I think that position itself, because you're tasked with learning a lot of things, right? As the point guard, you have to know the plays, run the plays. You have to know who's where and understand a lot of just management of the game. And I think it lends to that. The athletic guy gets away with things. The unathletic guy can't. The brain has to equalize it.
Steve Kerr, an unathletic point guard?
Shooter, but I think his thing is a little more philosophical. Like, I think he's been around really the great people, and then even his work as like a GM, I think lends him to be really great because he manages the people well. I feel like Steve Kerr is successful more in the same lines of a Joe Torre. What I mean? Like, he's a people manager and a lot of different personalities. I think that's where his strength is. But I think you get to like the sides of like the Billy Donovans, the Scott Brooks, the Sean Millers, the Mike Krzyzewski's, Pat Riley. Those types of guys. Like, it seems to fit in a lot of cases where
makes sense.
they fall into these positions, right? Because they've had to do it the entire time from the time they were little. So yeah, I think so. I feel like when you're a point guard, you're coaching anyway, to an extent. Mm-hmm. But what you don't realize is how much management there is that goes on, and then how many duties you need to take care of, and then how important the relationships are in building them. So that was probably the biggest progression once I started coaching, is to understand that the importance of that part. It's not just the X's and O's.
When you started coaching, like, how does that, head coaching, how does that happen? Like, how does somebody get word, hey, Dean, you're going to be the head coach of the team, we selected you? How does all that go down, and what were your kind of thoughts at the beginning?
Well, the history for me was in my sophomore year in college. I was at UH, and the opportunity to coach came up at the intermediate level. So I was an assistant to Ivan Suzuki at the intermediate level. And I was there for maybe 5 years. And then we had a lot of talent come through that intermediate level. At that point, we had a lot of like guys that were stars and made the team as freshmen. I mean, among them, the Bobby Nashes and the Derek Lowe's, but we had a lot of those guys. In a lot of cases, sometimes it was almost a better experience than the JV because the best guys would jump from intermediate from 8th grade and 9th grade, they'd go straight to the varsity. So we get the opportunity to have all the best guys, at least as 8th graders. So that was a fun part, right? I mean, that kind of got me in and started to understand what it was to coach and being able to understand what it's like to deal with young kids as coaches, even though they weren't that much younger than me at the time. But I was on the staff, officially on the staff, the 2001-2002 year when Derek was a sophomore, and that team has current GM Bobby Webster and John Grobe and Tyler McCready, and there was a lot of talented guys, including Bobby Nash and Derek Lowe, and they're really good. So I joined the staff with Adam Wong in that 2001-2002 season, and then we had that really great run of 5 championships through 2006. And then I don't know at what point this happened, but Doc started giving me and Adam a lot more responsibilities. So offensive responsibilities, managing more things in the summer league, and taking me to some of the ILH coaches meetings where there's part of the all-star selection, just getting me more involved in this process. I don't know if it was something that I was really conscious as far as, well, one of these guys is going to be the guy. I better start grooming him. I don't know if I want to continue doing this. I don't know if that was the case, but by the time we hit about 08 or 09, we were a lot more involved in implementing offenses and defenses and styles and doing a lot of those things. So by the time Doc stepped down after the 2009 season, it was a much easier transition for either myself or Adam to be able to step in as a head coach. So that's kind of how that happened.
Was it a surprise when Doc stepped down?
A little bit. I thought he was going to just coach into his 70s or 80s.
I think some people thought the same of you.
Yeah, same. There was points in time where, for me as a coach, I wanted to maybe take the next step. I didn't necessarily need to, but right around that same time, I was kind of looking at what kind of options were out there. Where could we go? Could I go to coach at Mid-Pac or Marinol or somewhere, I don't know, just to get that opportunity as a head coach. And I was looking at that because I didn't think Doc was going to leave. So yeah, a little bit of surprise. But once it started happening and we started to get more responsibility, I think we thought maybe this is going to happen.
Yeah. What were your initial thoughts when you were named the head coach?
It was in 2008, after the 2008-2009 season, we had the end of the year banquet, and 10 years ago, right? And we had a plan to make the announcement at that time. I had to go through some process and think about being head coach and all this type of stuff, talk to my wife, just do the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we knew a little bit before that, but the official announcement came at the banquet, and outside of this cool moment, like that was probably one of the cooler ones where there was some speculation and we knew the players really well, and it would have been a really seamless transition for it to be me or Adam, obviously. So the parents who were all there at the banquet, and then the kids and everything, and then I don't even remember what happened. I don't know if it was Eddie or if it was Doc that went up and said that I'm going to be the next head coach, and it's kind of like an ovation, like people clapping, and
Cool.
So again, it was, I don't know that I expected that, so at that same time that it was really cool, I was like, well, man, I better not screw this up, or
Yeah.
hope we do well, that type of thing. So that was pretty cool in itself. But again, it was neat to be at our banquet a few days ago and just think, man, 10 years ago I was standing in front of you just getting named as the head coach. So it was really neat. I mean, I don't know that I understood how much was involved. I mean, it was kind of this ignorant arrogance, I guess, about the whole process, that I just want to come in and do a good job. Like, I'm going to come in and bust my butt and work. And I think the other thing was, people asked a lot of this in the beginning, and I'm sure this question will be asked to the next person, but how much pressure did you feel?
Yeah.
At that point coming in, following Doc, right? And everybody said, well, big shoes to fill. And like I said, I don't know if it was this just ignorant arrogance. It was just, the bigger pressure was myself on myself. I didn't want to suck. Not because there's a legacy or because anything. I just don't want to suck at anything. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm going to take it, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I'm doing a good job. So, the pressure on myself was greater than any pressure that anyone else could put on me.
You did okay. 2010, you won the state title. That was the night I first met you. Actually, I was covering the D2 game for the Big Island newspaper, and you were by press row. I remember shaking your hand, saying congratulations.
Yeah, it was every season had its ups and downs. We were never a wire to wire team. We might have started out somewhere, and then at some point it looked like we weren't even going to make the state tournament. And
there were some crazy games. I wasn't even working here, but I would come to these games in the gym. And
as far as a single game goes, that state championship was definitely memorable. That was crazy. But the single game that may be the most memorable over the entire stretch, I think, was that we had this 3-team playoff in that year.
Yeah.
But even crazy. Prior to that, we had lost at Punahou, and it was like our second or third loss. And I don't remember what the format was, but if we lost another one, we might not make the state tournament. We were in jeopardy of staying at home during states.
Kind of like mini tournament.
No, so what happened? Yeah, so what happened was, in that year, after that Punahou game, we just went on this run, and there's things that happened over the course of that time that maybe caused that shift. But we went on this run, and I think somebody lost, and this and that, and then it forced this 3-way tie at 2 losses, and the tie was between us, Punahou, and Kamehameha, and we had to go do a card pull at AOP at the time, I remember. And we pulled the cards, and I pulled the worst card, which meant we had to go play. We had to play in the first game while the other team had a bye, and then we had to play at that team. So we had to play at Punahou on Friday, and if we won, we lobbied to at least get to play at home on Saturday. And that Saturday game, the gym was packed. They had the closed circuit to the upper gym, and the upper gym was packed. And we were down something like, I don't know, 6 in the last 2 minutes of the game, or 7. And we were down with 10 seconds left or something. And we took the last shot. We hit a 3 to go up to win the game, basically, at the buzzer. Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Crazy.
No, Yeah, it was crazy. So I mean, that single game was just wild. So
And then in the championship games, Kamehameha again.
yeah, we were down
With
again,
Michael
and
Christensen and all
yeah,
that.
yeah, and Kainoa Chu had the game of his life. At 27 or 29 in the state final, and scored our final like 12 or 15 points or something in a row, and hit the game winner. And yeah, I mean, at that point it was kind of surreal. I mean, you expect it to happen. That's your goal. And it's first year and all this kind of stuff, and it's just like I don't think I got to absorb it as much as I would have liked to, at least now looking back
Yeah.
on it.
So here's the natural question. That was a big moment. That was a first
Yeah.
as a head coach. And then in 1994, you guys won the state title. You were a player.
Mm-hmm.
And was the first since 1983. And now
Mm-hmm.
the school does 11. And that was a big first.
Mm-hmm.
How do those championships compare for you personally?
They're so different.
Yeah.
Because they're just different stages in your life, but I would say having the feeling that we did as players at that point in 1994, because prior to that, in my varsity career I went up as a sophomore, we didn't make the state tournament. As junior, we didn't make the state tournament. And as seniors, it was a group of guys that had played together from the time we were like seventh grade or sixth grade. And, we were really motivated, and we had an idea that this is something that could happen, but we'd never even been there yet. So we don't really know, So to be able to go out and get that one was a pretty special moment. I mean, you really reflect back to all the hours that you're putting in with your other coaches, or and in my case with my dad and all that kind of stuff, to be able to see that success there. But I mean, the success of that team and being able to win that, I think, definitely leads me to the second part of being a coach and wanting to coach, and knowing how great of a moment that it was for me, wanting to get that for somebody else.
Yeah. Wow, cool.
And knowing how much it impacted me, and maybe even changed my life path, right? So knowing that it had that kind of importance, you want to get that for someone else. So it's pretty rewarding to be able to have someone else experience it, but I think the second doesn't come without the first. So I don't know where you put in as far as importance, but both are pretty cool moments, but just for different reasons.
We have talked about this before, about that game, in particular that championship game in '94.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Chong hit a big shot. If the team didn't come through in that game, like I said, that's the first title since '83.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been many after that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Doc Mugiishi, and
Mm-hmm.
he kind of got rolling in the program. Like, what happens? I mean, we don't really need to answer that question here, but we've talked about this before, a 30 for 30 about what would you say if,
Right,
a team, I mean, this is a school that doesn't, I don't know, I don't know how to say this, but we don't deserve or have the right to have 11 state titles in a sport like boys basketball, but we do. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a parallel to this, right? The 1980 football team is kind of an outlier. They played in the Prep Bowl and 7-7 against Waianae, and our football program is great, but there's kind of that thing out there that something happened, and the 1983 team could be that thing for basketball. Something happened out there. 94 happened, and then Doc Mugiishi kind of caught fire as a coach, or the program did, or something. I don't know. I wasn't there. You were there. And then you were coaching in the program not so soon after. How much of a turning point is 94?
I think it was huge. I mean, as far as Iolani basketball goes, you cite 83 first, probably, because that puts that championship out there, that it was possible for a school, as you said, that doesn't have that type of makeup to go out and win a state championship. But then you follow that up with the start of the Iolani Classic. I mean, so those were two incredible moments in Iolani basketball, at least in the recent history.
Yeah.
But I don't know what happens without the 94 championship, because at that point, and I don't know, you know, anytime you're not successful at anything, you come under scrutiny. And the way Doc ended up, it's hard to imagine that there was scrutiny, you know, with his time as the coach, you know. But as you said, I mean, he wasn't the guy that you looked at that was going to be the head coach of the program. So there's probably already some bit of skepticism coming in. And then there were some talented teams that preceded us in 91 and 92 and
Yeah, he didn't make the tournament.
that were really good. Yeah, I mean, that didn't make the tournament, much less win a state championship. So I'm sure there were questions as far as, hey, is he the right guy? We don't know. But what you also don't realize is that there was no Iolani Classic in 93, 94. So that legacy that started in 83 could have died in 93. You know, or 93, 94, potentially. I mean, there was no Classic. It wasn't like it was on the decline. There was no Classic.
Yeah.
Because for one reason or another, right? So who knows if the Classic continues. And then 94 happens, we win, but the next championship happened again in 1998. And that 1998 championship was a lot to do with the Anderson twins deciding to come over to Iolani. You know, granted, there was Sean Christensen and Kirk Owaggio who were big parts of it, but the Anderson twins were a big part of that. Do they come? If maybe there's a different coach, maybe the current coach or Doc at the time wasn't that successful. I mean, do they come? Do they say, hey, this is a place where we need to be? I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But some of that success maybe leads to the arrival of a Derek Lowe or a Kyle Pape or a Kavika Shoji or, you know, whatever it is, right? I mean, a lot of these guys that were really impactful to the program. I mean, there were far more. And on that same note, do I become the head coach? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, but
It is kind of a 30 for 30 because there's a rekindling there. There's a gain of credibility, street cred. There's, you know, now, as we sit here today, the program, and it has for a while, sells itself. And to a lesser degree, the program was selling itself in the mid-90s, but off of that championship,
right,
largely.
Right. I mean, you look at these things, right, and they go in these ups and downs. I mean, you look at like the progress of a company like Apple, right? They nearly died in the mid-90s, and you can't imagine the world right now without Apple, you know. But there's a point in time that there's people that are credited with keeping it alive until something hit, you know. And I don't know. I think you find that a lot of cases with a lot of successful companies that they're able to kind of work through these points. But yeah, I mean, who knows what happens or doesn't happen without that Joe Chong shot.
Yeah, the Joe Chong shot.
But I mean, that's the thing.
You showed me that video. I think it was off a VHS, or it's now digitized, but it's a fascinating thing to watch.
No, and
knowing what happens after.
But there's history behind that even, right? So like Joe Chong was like the first, one of the few guys that he was in our class, and we were a pretty talented basketball class, and he was the guy that made the varsity as a freshman.
Even before you.
Yeah, before me. So before me, before Adam Wong, before Todd King, and those two guys were all state guys, you know. And so Joe Chong makes this team as a freshman and then has moderate success through his time, but in his senior year, he doesn't end up starting, and he's kind of playing spot minutes as a shooter/scorer, and yet you somehow knew he was going to be destined for something great. You just don't expect that, and you don't know when, and you don't expect that. But that's what it turned out to. I mean, that was that whole almost Cinderella, or maybe not even Cinderella, maybe Hoosiers point. I mean, there was, and maybe this is just lore now, looking back 25 years ago, but to say like, there was that Jimmy Chickwood moment where it's the I'll make it coach, you know, kind of thing in the huddle. I think it happened, you know. It sounds cool to have happened, but I'm pretty sure it happened. But, you know, like there's just that even in the course of that season and that game. But then to think how it impacted things moving forward is pretty crazy.
Yeah, to watch that was a lot of fun. And partly because you could see yourself, the future head coach, on the court, starting to play, and just how excited the team was, in particular Joe Chong on the bench, and still have to go out there and play defense. The team did. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no,
That was kind of a partial double clutch kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a neat thing, right? Because you take something like that, and fortunately, we have footage of those things, right? And obviously, there's a lot more footage now. But you take a look at that, and you've heard the story also. But in that front row, dead center in the middle is Kirk Coeggio.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
As a seventh grader, as like a seventh grader or eighth grader or whatever it was, and
he's probably like he was now. He probably got there really early and got the best seat and wanted to see it.
No, he tells a funny story about
really?
They came really late and his dad had to somehow negotiate a seat and he found a seat. But he became the guy that in 1998 they win the next championship. And, you know, I'm sure there's more stories behind that. But even for us, looking back when we were watching a couple years ago our 2010 championship and realizing that on the bench in 2010, when in the 2016 year, were Nikki Kennedy and Ryan Yoshioka, who were currently on our team and won a state championship in 2016. But they were the ball boys on the bench in 2010. You know, to be able to see that and go, oh, wow, God, I forgot you guys were in there, you know. Yeah. But that, I don't know, to be able to see that kind of thing, I think is really neat. And I think a lot of the reason why we're successful, because, I mean, you add to that the coaches that come back and coach, the players that come back and help at practice, and the alumni involvement, and, as I said earlier, the cool moments of being able to get texts from people that have been a part of Iolani for a long time, or whether they played or not, and how interested they are in it continuing. I mean, that's just incredible.
You know what? One of my favorite trivia questions to ask is about that team. So the 1994 team, your team, won the ILH championship. Who was the coach who won the previous ILH championship to that?
Father Bray.
Yeah, right? Father Kenneth A. Bray in 1951.
Yeah,
it was no small accomplishment to win.
That was
the
a Triple
league.
Crown year, right? Yeah. No, I remember them saying in the ILH, when we won the ILH, we won it in our gym against Kamehameha. I remember them saying it was the first ILH championship in 43 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, can't really fathom that. And I think at the time as a player, you don't really think of it as an accomplishment. You're kind of just like, we want to win the ILH championship. We're going to go and try and win a state championship. But you don't realize, like, 43 years, man.
And I think part of that, too, is the part about Father Bray. Like, as a coach, you probably, I mean, obviously we didn't know the man. And we knew Eddie Hamada for a bit. But as a coach, I mean, just hearing that name now, it's kind of a cool thing. For that to be the answer to a trivia question about an accomplishment.
Yeah. No, I mean, to have been involved in that game, and then anytime you hear it, right? Like, I think in the current NBA, when you hear someone get thrown into the mix of
Wilts
or Jordan, and you get put in that category, it's just completely like flattering. So to know that we're involved in that process, and then, you know, looking back on it now, I mean, even saying, like, you know, I played for Doc Mugiishi. He has 7 state championships. He's the winningest coach in Hawaii high school history for basketball. But yet he was involved during the Eddie Hamada years. And Just making those connections back down the line when you look at it historically is kind of mind-blowing. But very cool all at the same time.
We can't let you go without asking about one team. Sometimes I ask, for purpose of webcast, I ask players, what does one team mean to you? I'll ask you, what does one team, those two words, mean to you?
I don't know. It means everything to me. I mean, one team transcends sports, and the reason why that I'm leaving this job as a head coach is because my family is so important. I mean, my family, my team,
Yeah,
right?
it's your team.
And
it's your number one team.
But yet, on the same note, this greater team, whether it be the program and or the school, has supported me tremendously, through the process and then even in the decision. And that part about saying earlier where I'm getting these texts and messages from people far and wide, alums, former teachers, former players, coaches, just kind of shows how big that team is. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard to put it into singular words. I know people have, but
that's almost impossible to do.
Yeah, no, I think one team is that feeling. It's the soul of the school and why it's successful. And I really like to equate it more with family probably than anything, or at least that feeling. Because I think that's what separates us from everybody else. Obviously a lot of other great schools and a lot of other great places to be, but why do people stay here for a long time? Because it feels like your family. Why are we successful in sports? Because we all work together and we don't smile all the time, or it's not all peachy every time, but that's how family is. That's why it's strong. That's why it's successful. And how does it last that long? That family connection lasts forever. So, I don't know. I think that's how I put it. Maybe that one team to me is like family, or that feel.
Yeah, that's a really good way to break it down. In the athletic sense, for basketball, the Father Bray teachings and the whole Seabiscuit thing. I mean, it works in football. Size matters in football, but basketball as well, and teamwork. You're not always blessed with the Hugh Hoaglands of the world at 6'9", but everybody can go out there and play defense with a common purpose as one team. How do you get a group of boys that changes every year to become a community?
I don't want to sit here and make like I invented it out of thin air.
No, yeah,
you know what I
but
mean?
how-
But
how have you done
a
it?
lot of it was a credit to those that preceded me, right? I mean, like the biggest part, or one of the biggest parts of my success was that I didn't have to build a culture. I just had to continue it, or trying to keep it to live on, And so one team was already built into the school, at least the concept, and then it was more than just a saying, like it was what the kids bought into already. So to be able to have something like that in place, which is probably one of the bigger things in any type of team sport, has really helped the process along, So having that in place was huge.
I had the pleasure of traveling to the Big Island to see your guys' game at Hilo in the first round of the state tournament, and being around your team, more than I had in the previous 9 years that I've worked here. It was really cool to see. Like they're a team, they're together. That wasn't the toughest game that they played this season, but in games, you just see them playing with that. I like to refer to one team sometimes as common purpose, especially for athletics, like playing defense in particular with a common purpose, and all buying into that. It's really, really cool to see. And it's always a different mix, but we're always kind of end up, to some extent, a team playing with a common purpose, with a goal, employing strategies, different techniques, and those things that we kind of started off talking about. It must be very gratifying for you to go through that process year after year with a different set of guys. And to see those things.
Definitely. I mean, some years easier than others and things, but that's the great part about high school basketball. You know what you want to do, and you have these values and qualities that are important, but those things, those values, obviously, is in anything, whether it's sport or business or whatever, your values should stay the same. Your schemes and your style can change, but your values have to be the same. And
that's your foundation.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that you're pounding into these guys, right? The values of teamwork, the values of goal setting, and appreciation and respect and whatnot. But the cool part about high school basketball is that you do have to work with the guys that you have. College, you can bring in guys, or that's your job, is to recruit guys to your style, right? And fit them into the things that you do schematically. And you see that in football, and you see that in basketball a lot. But that's the challenge of high school, is being able to take totally different guys, but instilling values that you think are going to work, right? Or that are super important, and then attaching that to a style that's going to fit these guys, not the other way around. And that need to be adaptable, and that challenge is what keeps high school basketball so exciting, from year to year, especially as a coach. So I almost see it as being easier to stay in high school basketball for a longer time, because it is changing. Like, if you're just kind of doing the same style in college, where you're coaching the same thing and the same style over and over, I would think it can get repetitive, even though you can be super successful. And the kids do change a little bit, but I don't know. That's the cool part about high school. And then you're dealing with kids that are not adults yet. I mean, that's the frustration and the enjoyment all at the same time. But then you get to see the biggest years of growth. I mean, you say it when kids are little, right? From 2 years old to 5 years old, you're like, oh my goodness, they're twice as old as they were, and they're like totally different people. But from freshman to sophomore to those single year jumps are so huge for kids at this age. So to be able to see that and then try to work on it, it's a challenge, but like I said, I mean, so rewarding.
And then to see them become leaders.
Yeah, no, I mean, to see guys step up and even become people that you weren't sure they could even become themselves, like that's cool. That's why I said, I think earlier your question was about which team, saw like that biggest growth, and I want to say it was that 2016 team. A lot of them were there on 2014 when we won, but the growth of those guys, like primarily like a guy like a Robbie Mann, like as a senior, and even after he's graduated, I'm telling him, I was like, it's blowing my mind that I'm going to tell someone that was in your same position as a sophomore, and knowing how you acted and some of the things, the choices and decisions that you made, that I'm going to say, you need to be like Robbie. Like, I told him, I was like, it's crazy that I'm going to use you as some type of reference. But that just goes to show the growth that he made from that time as a sophomore or even a freshman to the time he was a senior. And it was like night and day.
And that's cool too, because the player that you're probably telling you need to be like Robbie probably knows exactly what you're talking about, because it's probably a 7th grader who came to the varsity games and was in the program and saw it like the rest of us as spectators, the growth and the development.
Yeah, because I mean, in the past, you've seen kids go through it and they weren't as successful as him, and then the team wasn't quite as successful maybe as it could have been. So to see it actually come through and see him make that shift, or or have that kind of growth is really cool, and it's a neat process for me, because I think there were people in the past that I coached that I feel like, in retrospect, I failed on. Like I could have done a much better job with them and would have impacted their life better, and that team would have been better, and all this kind of stuff, But I also realized that without those guys and me struggling with them, I wouldn't have been as successful with the next group of guys that was very similar to them. And as much as you are disappointed for that group, I guess it almost becomes like a guinea pig type of scenario. It was just as awesome to see that next group be successful, and know that we didn't stay the same, and know that we made progress and recognize some shortcomings and were able to fix them and then reapply them to somebody else. So I mean, that progression was really neat, for me as a coach. I mean, that was really neat. But yeah, I still feel bad. Like I said, I could look back a year ago and feel like I did something wrong and wronged somebody somehow, by not giving them everything I know now.
Every coach probably feels that way, or teacher. Or
yeah, I think
parent.
so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, you can
That's
look
natural.
back and just kind of laugh, and you're almost embarrassed at the decisions you made, or how you approached something, or how you said things, or how you acted. And I think that's just general maturity. But yeah, definitely feel that way. But that's why you see these guys that have coached for years and years and years. Why they're so successful is because they've gone through tons of ups and downs and have had tons and tons of experiences to draw on.
Yeah, it's awesome to kind of think about the impact of coaches and teachers and, of course, parents on young lives. That's why we value what you do. Well, we're not sitting around a big round table, and it's not anywhere near 9 o'clock in the morning. But I mentioned that because we're not in the faculty lounge where we've had discussions before, somewhat like this. Typically, actually not about sports, but for those who don't know, Coach Shimamoto and I, this is kind of the basis of what the Iolani School podcast is. And we would sit there and talk to different people who would come in for coffee or toast or now oatmeal and have interesting conversations, kind of dig deep into different aspects of what we see at the school and our own lives, and sometimes about sports, maybe oftentimes about sports. But and then you challenged me, kind of like a coach one day. You said, I don't know if you remember this, but you said, "What's stopping you?" So I was like, "Oh, well, let's start a podcast then." And with the help of King's Iolani over there, our sound engineer, we have a podcast. And thank you for taking the time to be on your first official podcast, even though we've done this dozens, if not hundreds of times over the years.
Yeah, the Faculty Lounge podcast, maybe becomes an offshoot, because the randomness is part of the greatness, right, of that entire podcast.
I was just telling Kings that idea. I said we go in there with 3 headsets, and we sit there, and people walk in, and it'll be, well, what are you guys doing? And say, don't worry about it, sit down, and hand them a headset.
No, those were the greatest moments where a random person would walk in and just change the topic, or not even change the topic, or would expand on whatever it is that we were talking about and bring a whole different, unexpected perspective on.
Yeah. That's the whole idea of this.
Yeah.
Is to have interesting conversations about the people that make this place tick, and kind of dive in and deep into the tangents. We talked to you mostly about coaching, but that's a really interesting topic, you know, I think. It's something that everybody watches sports.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody, at least something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just the Super Bowl, maybe, you know, maybe a lot of sports, but coaches and what they do, I think it was important for you to share how much work and thought goes into it. And then toward the end, we wrapped up by talking about the impact these people make, particularly at our school. And we're not going to put people up on the Mount Rushmore of Iolani School. There's probably only going to be 2.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really cool that this school has those kinds of influences that have passed down through the years to yourself and the person who will take your place.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about this place. I mean, it's the same thing, right? No one's looking for credit. I mean, no one sets out to be an impactful influencer. You know what I mean? Like, no one says, I need to be on that Mount Rushmore, you know, or whatever it is. That you just kind of go out and do what you do.
Yep.
Right? And
it's kind of your obligation at some point.
Right.
If you choose to accept it.
And it's passed on from the people that came before, right? I mean, the people that selflessly did things for the betterment of the next group or the next generation or the kids or the players or whatever it is, right? That's just what they did. And then if you're the one to follow, that's what you pick up on, and you're trying to do the same thing. I mean, you know. So I think that's what's neat. I mean, back to that same thing. I mean, that family comment about what is one team and what does it mean to me. I mean, that's all part of it, you know, ancestrally, I guess, carrying it down through the generations. And it has a feel from the previous one, but you take it and you maintain the values, but maybe you shift it a little bit and try to make it a little bit better and hand that baton off to the next group.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks once again for taking the time, and selfishly, we wish you were still coaching the team, but we feel that maybe you'll be involved in some level, but best wishes to you and your wife, Teresa, and your sons, Kaika and Koa. We look forward to watching them grow.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't start this season it wasn't the farewell tour of a season, you know, and yet I thought it was a really great season. And then, you know, to reflect back, I thought it was a really fun and enjoyable career. But yeah, I mean, the greatest memories are all about the journey taken. And you get to the end and you see things and you look around, but the memorable parts are how you got there. So that's what I'm reflecting back on, and, you know, kind of looking forward to this new journey.
Yeah, a new chapter.
Yeah.
But the journey has been fun, and just speaking for fans of our school and fans of basketball, we thank you for your contributions for many years. 23 years as a coach, 10 as the head coach. And we're not talking about the championships, we're just talking about those memories and the fun we had in the lower gym and the Blaisdell and the Stan Sheriff and other facilities on the island. Thank you, Coach. Much appreciated.
Thank you.